For over 1,000 years, one meditation technique has remained buried beneath the sands of time, whispered only in ancient scrolls and forbidden temples. It wasn't forgotten by accident. It was hidden on purpose, because this technique, when practiced without full understanding, can shatter your identity, dissolve your sense of self, and leave you standing face to face with something so vast, so terrifying, that most who encountered it never returned to normal consciousness. Some say it unlocks ultimate liberation. Others call it a spiritual death trap. Why was it banned for over 1,000 years? And why are some modern mystics now daring to bring it back? What you're about to discover isn't taught in mainstream mindfulness apps or popular yoga classes. This isn't about calming your mind, it's about confronting it. This is the story of the most dangerous meditation technique known to man, and why it might just be the doorway to everything you've ever been seeking. But be warned, once you understand how it works, you can never unsee it. Long before modern science mapped the brain, before mindfulness was a billion-dollar industry, there were mystics, deep in the Himalayan caves, the deserts of Egypt, and the mountains of Tibet, who believed that true reality could only be seen once the veil of the self was shattered. These weren't gentle seekers of peace. They were spiritual warriors, practitioners of a radical path. And at the heart of this path lay a technique so powerful and so destabilizing, it was eventually banned by entire schools of thought. Its name has been lost in time, but in ancient Sanskrit texts, it was referred to simply as Antara Moksha Sadhana, the inner liberation practice. This wasn't ordinary meditation. It wasn't about calming the mind or cultivating compassion. It was about annihilating everything you thought was you. The technique surfaced in early tantric traditions, particularly within Agori and Kaula lineages, known for embracing the forbidden. It also appears in fragments of Dzogchen from Tibet and esoteric Taoist alchemical texts from China. Each described a similar process: sit in absolute stillness, eyes open, breath shallow. Then begin to peel back every layer of identity, thought by thought, memory by memory, until only emptiness remains. The goal was not clarity. It was obliteration. According to a 12th century manuscript from Kashmir, a practitioner named Virananda attempted the practice for 49 consecutive nights. On the 50th morning, he awoke screaming, claiming he had become the void, unable to distinguish between his body and the cosmos. Within a week, he disappeared into the mountains. Some say he ascended. Others believe he went mad. This story became a warning, passed down through oral traditions. When you meet yourself at the end of your thoughts, will you be ready for what looks back? Entire schools began to abandon the practice. It was deemed too volatile, too intense, and most importantly, too effective. By the 15th century, it was considered heresy in many Buddhist and Hindu communities. The practice was stripped from texts, removed from teachings, and hidden away, locked behind metaphor and cryptic verse, accessible only to initiates who had undergone years of training. And yet, it never truly vanished. In secret circles, in modern-day Nepal, Siberia, and certain underground mystery schools, whispers of this technique remain. And in recent years, a new generation of seekers has begun asking dangerous questions. What if this practice isn't madness, but truth? What if this ancient method wasn't suppressed because it didn't work, but because it worked too well? So what exactly made this meditation so dangerous, so feared, that it was intentionally erased from ancient scrolls? The answer isn't just mystical, it's neurological. But let's begin where the practice itself does, with stillness. True stillness. Not just sitting in silence, but entering a state where all movement of the body and mind is voluntarily suppressed. No blinking, no swallowing, no shifting weight. You become the statue, the observer, and then the observed. This might sound simple, even peaceful. But here's the secret. Stillness doesn't calm the mind. It traps it. Your thoughts begin to turn in on themselves. At first, they whisper. Then they loop. Then they scream. In modern neuroscience, this is described as DMN disruption, a breakdown in the default mode network, the part of your brain responsible for maintaining your sense of self. In ordinary meditation, this disruption is gradual. In this ancient technique, It's forced. By maintaining absolute stillness and directing awareness inward, the mind is starved of sensory input. There's nothing to grasp onto, no narrative, no movement, no stimulus. What happens next is a psychological collapse often described as an ego death. And this is the real danger. According to studies from Johns Hopkins and Imperial College London, advanced meditators and psychedelic users who've experienced ego death report it as the most terrifying and liberating experience of their lives. Some describe dissolving into light, others sinking into infinite darkness. But there's a catch. If you're not prepared, ego death doesn't feel like awakening. It feels like dying. In fact, early versions of this practice were called little death rituals. Practitioners warned that if the student had unresolved trauma, psychological instability, or fear of loss, this technique would amplify it until they fractured. We're not talking about metaphorical emotions. We're talking about identity disintegration. Here's how it unfolds. First, the mind begins to detach from the body. The practitioner may no longer feel their arms, legs, or heartbeat. Next, memory begins to fade. Names, faces, and even the sense of time dissolve into fog. Finally, the I, the internal narrator, begins to vanish. The voice in your head goes silent. At this stage, some describe unimaginable bliss, the feeling of becoming one with all things. Others, however, experience raw existential terror, a void that stares back. This is why ancient schools banned the practice, because for every student who reached awakening, there were many more who came back, broken. But here's what's truly mind-blowing. Modern psychology has unknowingly begun to circle back to this ancient path. Techniques like darkroom retreats, extended silence meditation, and even guided DMT therapy are now mimicking what ancient mystics did in caves over 1,000 years ago. So the real question is this. If this technique was so powerful that it had to be buried, why is it beginning to resurface now? And who or what doesn't want us to remember it? The question is not just how the technique worked, but why the ancient masters chose to hide it. And to answer that, we need to look beyond the personal. This was never just about one seeker, one experience, one awakening. It was about control. Ancient mystery schools, whether in Egypt, Tibet, India, or Persia, guarded certain knowledge not to protect the practitioner, but to protect the system. You see, the technique didn't just break the ego, it broke the illusion of separation. Those who mastered it began to see through the fabric of reality, not symbolically, literally. They claimed to perceive consciousness before thought, time without sequence, and self beyond identity. But what happens when too many people realize the truth? The truth that consciousness isn't confined to the body, that death isn't the end. That reality is, at best, a mirror, and at worst, a lie. It becomes a threat to kings, to priests, to empires. There are scrolls from 900 AD warning of this exact thing. A passage found in an old Persian manuscript reads, "Let not the uninitiated walk the spiral path, for they will see the face of the world removed." That phrase, the face of the world removed, is important. It refers to Maya, or illusion, the veil we all live behind. And this technique didn't just lift the veil, it ripped it. There are documented accounts of monks who, after reaching this state, refused to speak, not out of reverence, out of futility. They would smile, they would sit, but they would never explain. Because how do you describe something beyond language? And here's where things get strange. Some who practiced this meditation reported abilities that defied logic. Ancient texts speak of sudden healings, prophetic dreams, even levitation. These are known as siddhis, mystical powers that are said to arise as a side effect, not a goal. But the ancient schools feared siddhis. They believed power without wisdom leads to destruction. So rather than risk corruption or chaos, they shut it all down. Entire sections of sacred texts were edited or burned. Initiates were silenced. The practice was erased. And yet, it survived. Quietly. Hidden in symbols, myths, and whispered teachings passed from teacher to student. What's even more intriguing is that the technique reappears under different names across different cultures. In Taoist inner alchemy, it's called the empty vessel. in Sufi mysticism, the witness state, and in early Christian Gnostic writings, the still point, different language, same path. A technique so powerful it was buried beneath 1,000 years of silence. But now, as global consciousness rises, as ancient texts are decoded, as science begins to confirm what mystics have always known, the door is opening again. The meditation that once shattered the mind may be the very key to understanding what we really are. Not flesh, not thoughts, but awareness itself. So the real danger isn't just in the practice, it's in remembering who we were before the forgetting began. The meditation was never a single action. It was a journey, a descent into the layers of self, stripping away illusion like ancient skin. The manuscripts describe it in 5 distinct phases, each one more unsettling, each one more revealing. Not everyone made it past the first, but those who did, they claimed they were never the same. Let's begin. Phase 1. The shifting breath. On the surface, it seems like a simple breathing technique, but it's not about oxygen. It's about pattern disruption. You start by inhaling deeply through the left nostril, holding, then exhaling through the right, then the reverse. This isn't for calm, it's for rewiring. After a few minutes, the hemispheres of your brain begin to synchronize. Your thoughts become slower, heavier, like silt sinking to the bottom of a still lake. It's not comfortable. Your mind will rebel. But if you hold steady, phase 2 begins. Phase 2. The watching mind. Now you stop doing. You begin watching. Thoughts arise, images, memories, urges. But instead of following them, you observe like a stranger. Here's where most people quit. Because what you start seeing is not what you expected. You don't just notice thoughts. You notice the thinker. And then you realize the thinker is also a thought. And that's terrifying. Everything you identified with, your personality, your voice, your emotions, suddenly feels like a costume. This is where the ego tries to pull you back. But if you keep going, phase 3, the spiral void. It's called the spiral, not because of shape, but because of sensation. Practitioners describe a strange feeling here, as if they're falling inwards, spinning gently but unstoppably toward a dark center. This is where time begins to break down. You might see moments from childhood, faces from dreams, even symbols or languages you've never studied before. Don't analyze them. This isn't the time for logic. You're drifting past the subconscious now. You're heading toward something older. Phase 4. The mirror gate. This is the most dangerous part, not because of physical risk, but because of what it shows you. The mirror gate is the name mystics gave to the moment when you come face to face with your true self. No filters, no roles, no stories, just raw being, naked consciousness. It's overwhelming. Some burst into tears, some laugh, some feel like they've died. And in a sense, they have. Because once you pass through this gate, you're no longer who you were. And that leads to the final stage. Phase 5. The white silence. No sound, no thought, no sensation. Just silence. But not the absence of noise. This is a living silence. A field of presence that contains everything. Mystics describe this moment with phrases like being inside the mind of God or melting into the ocean of awareness. There are no visions here, no colors, no guides, just pure stillness. And it's in this stillness that something extraordinary happens. You realize you've never moved. You were always here, and everything you ever thought, felt, feared was just ripples. Ripples on the surface of a vast consciousness you'd forgotten you were part of. This is the gift of the technique. Not power, not escape, but remembrance of who you were before you were told who to be. Before you get tempted to try this technique yourself, stop for a moment. Because what we're about to explore is not a disclaimer. It's not something you'll find at the bottom of a blog post or whispered in the back pages of a spiritual manual. These are the warnings that were carved into stone, whispered between masters and apprentices, and encoded in ancient metaphors, not to discourage the seeker, but to protect the soul. This technique, when practiced improperly, has the potential to do more than just open your third eye or expand your awareness. It can completely fracture your sense of identity. You see, Most people begin spiritual practices hoping to gain something: peace, power, insight. But this technique was never about gaining. It was about dying before you die. And if you're not ready for that death, a symbolic one, yes, but no less real, the psychological consequences can be severe. In some texts, this was referred to as the shattering, a phase where the practitioner would suddenly feel like nothing in their life was real anymore. Friends, family, even their own memories began to feel distant, like echoes from another dream. Modern psychology might label it dissociation or even depersonalization, but the ancient mystics knew this was part of the process, a tearing down of the false self, the ego, the illusion of separateness. And while it sounds poetic, it's terrifying when it happens to you. Imagine waking up one morning and not recognizing your own thoughts as your own, not in a paranoid way, but in a cold, detached realization that the you thought you were was just a story. This is why certain initiates were forbidden from going too deep, too fast. There were levels, initiation steps, internal scaffolding that had to be built before the descent. Without this preparation, something ancient texts warned about, the wandering of the self, could begin. They described it as a soul that no longer knows how to return to its body, a consciousness stuck halfway between dimensions, lost in waking dreams, living but not quite here. Of course, today we don't have words for this. Maybe we call it a psychotic break or a spiritual emergency. But regardless of label, the root remains, a disintegration of the self without the tools to reassemble it. Some masters told stories of students who had to be pulled back through ritual and intense grounding practices. Others simply disappeared, moved into caves, forests, mountains, trying to find themselves again. And that brings us to you, the viewer. Because we live in an age where everything is instant, downloadable, packaged into step-by-step tutorials. But ancient knowledge doesn't work that way. It demands more than curiosity. It demands sincerity, reverence, respect. So the warning is not meant to frighten you away, but to awaken something deeper in you. Discernment. This technique isn't for everyone, and that's okay. It's not a badge. It's not a shortcut to enlightenment. It's a mirror, one that reflects everything, the beautiful and the unbearable. And if you stare too long without preparation, you might not like what looks back. So, if this ancient meditation technique is so dangerous, why did the mystics preserve it at all? Why not let it fade into obscurity, buried beneath layers of safer, gentler practices? The answer is as simple as it is profound. Because the greatest dangers often hide the greatest truths. This practice wasn't created to entertain the curious. It wasn't designed for beginners seeking calm minds or minor insights. It was crafted for those who felt something burning inside them, a question too vast for ordinary life to answer, a thirst not for peace, but for truth, no matter the cost. And for those rare few, there is a way to approach this practice, not recklessly, not arrogantly, but with the caution and preparation that the ancient initiates demanded. Step 1. Inner calibration. Before even attempting the technique, the old masters would spend months, sometimes years, preparing their nervous systems, grounding in stillness, purifying the body and mind through disciplined routines, not for spiritual points, but to build resilience, because without this grounding, the floodgates open too fast. In modern terms, this could look like extended mindfulness, body scanning, breath work, or simply building a deep, consistent practice of stillness. You're learning how to stay in your body, even when your mind begins to transcend it. Step 2. Symbolic anchors. The ancients didn't trust the mind to hold itself together in altered states, so they embedded themselves with symbols, visual, auditory, even tactile objects that represented a sense of home, a mantra, a physical token, a scent. These were not woo. These were lifelines. Modern science is only just catching up. Trauma-informed therapists now use grounding objects in a similar way, something to tether the self when things get overwhelming. The mystics figured this out centuries ago. Step 3. Sacred timing. This technique was never practiced randomly. The timing mattered. The lunar phase, the planetary alignments, even the hour of the day. While this might sound astrological, it speaks to a deeper truth. The inner world is not disconnected from the outer one. The ancients believed that practicing at certain moments opened natural gateways, where the barrier between the physical and metaphysical was thinner. At the very least, it shows their respect for rhythms, both internal and cosmic. You don't need to track planets, but you do need to listen. Know the difference between a curious urge and a sincere calling. One comes from the surface, the other from the soul. Step 4. The 3 realizations. Just before the technique begins, the seeker was required to internalize 3 realizations. You are not the body. You are not the mind. You are not in control of what you're about to see. These mantras weren't poetic fluff. They were protective instructions. They taught the practitioner to become the witness, not the judge, to observe what arises during the technique without clinging, resisting, or interpreting. Because the moment you try to shape the vision, it collapses back into ego. And that brings us to step 5. The return. No matter how deep you go, always return. The most advanced mystics had rituals to come back, often involving touch, chanting, grounding, or eating specific foods. Not for ceremony, but to pull consciousness fully back into the body. In our time, this can be as simple as walking barefoot on grass, breathing deeply, journaling, talking to someone, re-entering the world, not as an escape, but as an integration. Because the point of any deep inner practice is not to escape the world. It's to transform how you live in it, to use what you've seen, in the void, in the light, in yourself, and embody it. And only then are you ready for the final secret. So, was it really just a meditation technique? Or was it a mirror held up to the soul, forcing us to confront what we spend most of life avoiding? The ancient masters knew transformation never comes without risk. But maybe that's the point. If this stirred something in you, you're not alone. There are deeper layers, and we're just getting started. Like, subscribe, and when you're ready to go further, I'll meet you there.